Well, guys, thank you all so much for coming this evening. As Allie said, we have lots of information to share with y'all, so please do feel free to drop any questions that you have in the chat, and we will be around to chat with you all later too, beyond the information that we've got. So just feel free to take advantage of that chat window down in the bottom. And you can also, if you want, you can share the results of your Georgia Shorebird quiz if you were able to complete that quiz with everybody. So we'll go ahead and kick it off. See if this is going to work. So just quickly, just a tiny bit of background. Allie and I are part of Manomet's Georgia Bight Shorebird Conservation Initiative. The Georgia Bight, we'll talk about that more in a minute here, but our main areas of focus are Georgia coast and South Carolina coast, and a bit of the very northeastern tip of the Florida coast as well, sort of the scope of our work. And within this area, the Georgia Bight Shorebird Conservation Initiative is trying to build this regional network because we know the birds that use this area, they're bouncing around between all of our barrier islands. They're bouncing around between the states. And so what we really need to do to have any kind of effective conservation program is build partnerships so that we can keep this really valuable habitat in as good a condition as possible, and then work to proactively carry out research and plan habitat for future scenarios as well, so that our little corner of the world stays as the incredible habitat that it is. Tonight, we are going to talk about a lot of different things. So we've got some background and life history of shorebirds. We had, I guess, a pretty diverse group of folks joining us tonight. So we're trying to cover a lot, and hopefully we'll be able to provide you all some good information as we go through this. But if people have lingering questions, we can talk about stuff more, put on future presentations, and all sorts of different things. So we're going to do like a very quick basic ID of shorebirds because we heard from some folks that people were interested in that. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the birds that nest on our Georgia coast and South Carolina coast, our migratory shorebirds, and talk a little bit about our winter visitors. We're really going to emphasize the migratory and winter shorebirds because that's kind of the point of tonight's talk. We're really trying to get people excited and empowered to go out and steward in the fall and winter. A lot of times we get volunteers who are eager to be on the beaches during the summer when we might have nesting birds, but shorebirds use our beautiful Georgia, South Carolina coast all throughout the entire year. So this is a really important thing for us. We're going to talk a little bit about why getting involved is so important, what conservation challenges our shorebirds face, and then we'll talk a little bit about some of the ways that we address some of these big threats, and talk a little bit more about stewarding and how you can get out and talk to people, and talk a little bit about some of the tools that we have available as well, because we're really excited about expanding some of these efforts. So if you're working at a site and you want to start your own stewarding program, please stay in touch with us. And we'll wrap it up to talk about some upcoming events as well. And so for a lot of people who head to the beach, this is what they think of when they think of the beach. But for those of us who love our beaches and our birds, we know that's not the case, right? The beach is not just a sandbox next to a swimming pool. It's really important habitat for a lot of different plants and animal species. And I think, whether you love terrapins or shorebirds, there's ways to connect people with this habitat and help them really understand that the beach is so much more than just a place to hang out in the sun. It's a really dynamic, incredible environment with a lot of specialized plants and animals that depend on it. So that's sort of the lens that I think we sort of try to take when we're thinking about overall stewardship of this really precious habitat. And so for Allie and me, and maybe some of you all on this training tonight, our vehicle to get people excited about the beach is shorebirds and seabirds. So we'll break it down a little bit, and we're going to talk basics. What is a shorebird? So some people, when they hear us talking about shorebirds, they say, I love shorebirds. Pelicans are my favorite. And we have to rein them in a little bit and explain that those are actually not shorebirds. Shorebirds are broadly the group that includes sandpipers and plovers. So they are birds with longish beaks, longish legs. They use those tools to kind of probe in the wet mud and sand to find food. They do not have webbed feet. They cannot swim for the most part. So they are really found in these interfaces between water and dry land. They like soggy areas, they like muddy areas. And so that's kind of what we think about when we're talking about shorebirds. It's not ducks and waterfowl. It's not wading birds like herons and egrets. It's not the seabirds, which we'll talk about, like terns and gulls. So these are shorebirds. And shorebirds are really neat. They've got a lot of cool adaptations to access a wide variety of different food resources along our coast. A lot of neat specialized bills, like the American oyster catcher, who's got a bill that looks just like a shucking knife. You've got an American avocet with this super cool turned up bill that they use to filter. Wilson's plovers, they don't look like much, but they've got a little stout bill that they can use to catch fiddler crabs, which is really cool. So a lot of cool, clever adaptations that make shorebirds really incredible and pretty diverse looking. And we can't talk about how cool shorebirds are without talking about how important our coastline is to them. So we have a really wide variety of shorebirds that use our coast throughout the entire calendar year. And because of the number of birds that use our coast, we actually have 3 sites along the Georgia and South Carolina coasts that are internationally recognized by the Western Hemisphere Shorebird Reserve Network. We call that network WISRN, which is kind of a weird acronym. But there's 3 WISRN sites in Georgia and South Carolina. So that means we're hosting, pretty significant proportions of shorebirds throughout the entire year. There's the Altamaha River Delta down at the mouth of the Altamaha River. There's the Georgia Barrier Islands site, which was the 100th site. It's a landscape of hemispheric importance. And then there's Cape Romaine Santee Delta region up in South Carolina. So these are really important places for shorebirds at an international scale, but our whole entire coast is really providing the resources that shorebirds need. And that is because our coast is really cool. It's actually because of the geology and the geography of our coast that we can support so many shorebirds. And so I love this diagram, and I apologize to anybody who's seen me give a talk before because I use it in every single one because I think it's so cool. But you've got our Georgia, South Carolina coast here, right? The Georgia Bight, technically stretching from Cape Hatteras up in North Carolina all the way down to Cape Canaveral, the curved part of our coastline. So Bight, B-I-G-H-T, means the curved part of the coast. And because it's curved, this is kind of our focal area here with a lot of our work. But because it's curved, that's the reason that we get some of the high tides that we have. So this dotted line shows you our tidal amplitude as you get towards the middle part of that bight, the curve. Those tides get bigger and bigger and bigger because it kind of compresses and bottles all that water up. The other thing that happens is we have a very shallow slope all the way out to the edge of the continental shelf. So because of the curve, this gradual slope, we have pretty low wave energy. And as I mentioned, that really high tidal range. So because of that, that's why we have these really well-developed, beautiful barrier islands, these nice chunky barrier islands. If you compare that to north of Cape Hatteras, you start to get those really skinny North Carolina barrier islands, right? So that's actually the reason for the way those islands have shaped over the years. The other cool thing is that we have a lot of inlets where river systems dump out into the coast, and those inlets are really close together as you get towards the middle of the bight. So because of all these features, you've got river systems dumping out sand and sediment, building up habitat. You've got these really well-developed barrier islands. The Georgia coast is an incredible place for shorebirds throughout the entire year. We've got these remote beaches, this high tidal range, and that means we have huge expanses of mud and sand flats for shorebirds to forage on. When the tide goes out, it's a never-ending all-you-can-eat buffet, and then the tide comes in, it refreshes the whole system, feeding all the invertebrates that the shorebirds are eating, and just really abundant food resources. We've got huge river estuaries dumping sand and sediment down so that these areas build up. If you look at our coastline, it's really squiggly and curvy because we have very minimal amounts of shoreline engineering. That's very important for creating good shorebird habitat, right? A healthy coast is wiggly. It's not straight edges like you see down in Florida. We also have a lot of places where there are very few people, so birds have areas where there's limited disturbance. And then in many places, especially in South Carolina, but also in Georgia, there's a lot of impoundments and managed wetlands that also provide habitat for shorebirds. So we're kind of this wonderful recipe for the very best habitat for shorebirds. And Allie and I get to work with folks from the whole entire Western Hemisphere, and people that have traveled all over seeing cool shorebird spots, and almost everybody says that our little corner of the world is unparalleled. So don't take it for granted. We live in a really, really cool spot. And because of that, we have birds throughout the whole entire year. So there's some places in this world that are important for shorebirds for a little tiny snippet of the year for some, migration or for nesting, but during the entire year, we are important for shorebirds. So migration, both spring when birds are moving north and fall when they're moving south. We have a whole range of different Arctic nesting species. We'll talk about those a little bit more. Winter, we've got piping plovers here, and then during the nesting season as well. And so I wanted to just take a quick moment and talk a little bit about Shorebird ID. I don't know, folks on this call, how many folks are interested in ID, but I think it's worth talking a little bit about because Shorebird ID is very often thought to be like an impossible thing, especially in the fall and in the winter. So in Georgia, we have about 30 common species of shorebirds. There's one, two, three, at least three different species here in this photo. And anybody that does ISS can do a quick count and and get a gold star for letting us know who's in this photo. But for some people, that picture is a little bit stressful, right? Like these birds kind of all look the same and they can be really tricky. But you don't have to worry. So I kind of think, generally speaking, we've got about 30 species of common shorebirds in Georgia. And when I think about helping folks ID them as they're just starting out, there's some good tricks of the trade. And so I wanted to share a few of those tonight, even though we don't have a ton of time. So we have about 30 species of shorebirds, but some of them are very distinct looking, right? Like an American oystercatcher or American avocet, a black-necked stilt. These guys, super interesting, black and white plumage, but they're very distinct from even one another. So you're probably not going to get those guys mixed up. And then the other kind of great clue is sometimes birds have really distinct looking bills. The marbled godwit, for instance, there's not any other shorebird that has a bill that looks quite like that. So that's kind of helping you narrow it down a little bit. It is tricky because you have, of course, the very pesky changes from non-breeding to breeding plumage. So folks that learn shorebirds in the spring are often extremely disheartened when fall rolls around and the Dunlin that they could ID without a second thought comes back looking really confusing, right? And so that's one of the reasons that we say often what you want to do is focus on the shape and the size of the bird rather than just the plumage, because for many of these birds that move through here, they have really distinct breeding plumages that can be very confusing. So this is kind of a rundown of some of the more common shorebirds that you're going to see on our Georgia coast. And really, I think the best approach to ID is using size and structure of these birds to narrow down who you're looking at. And that went a little faster than I meant it to. Hang on. So, yeah. The list could be a little overwhelming at first, but if you use process of elimination to knock out certain easy to ID birds, you can start to get a little bit of a handle on it. So I always kind of think about this first group up in here. We kind of talked about some really distinct plumages, crazy bills that you're not going to get them mixed up with anybody else. You've got a godwit, you've got a whimbrel, you've got a long-billed curlew, right? Those are pretty distinct. And then there's another group here that we'll talk about in a second. There's some good defining characteristics that can help you figure out who's who in that little chunk. So when you're trying to understand the bird that you're looking at, narrowing it down and, understanding the bill length and what that bill is used for can be really a helpful clue. And so you knock out some of those more easy to ID species, and then you've got some of the smaller shorebirds that might get a little bit confusing. And from here, one of the best things to do is really to break it down and look closely at if you're looking at a plover or a sandpiper. Now, plovers tend to have big eyes, stubby bills, and sandpipers tend to have littler eyes and longer bills. Sandpipers are tactile feeders, so they're running and feeling along the beach as they go. They're like little wind-up toys. So even if you don't have binoculars, even if you don't know shorebirds, if you're just looking at a bird and it's running, kind of neurotic, It is very likely a sandpiper. Plovers with these big eyes and these stubby bills tend to feed a lot more like a robin or something that you might be more familiar with, kind of looking around, running, dashing, grabbing something. And so breaking it down by if it's a sandpiper or a plover is one way to get a really good start at trying to figure out the bird that you're looking at. When we want to talk about plovers specifically, um, there's a few cues that we use. One is looking at neck bands and size. So these two are a lot bigger. These three are very similar in size, but the killdeer here is brown. It's got two neck bands. I always say it's got two L's in the name and two neck bands, so you never get killdeer confused with anybody else. And then the black-bellied plover is larger than any of these other plovers. So it's just a game of process of elimination. That leaves you with these three smaller plovers, and they can be a little bit confusing, but you've got Wilson's plover with a big chunky bill here that it uses to eat fiddler crabs, and then you've got these two. They look really similar, but generally the piping plover is the color of dry sand, and the semi-palmated plover is the color of wet sand. So we can use cues like plumage color there to differentiate the two. And then when we start to get into sandpipers, it can be a little bit confusing, but again, looking at size and shape of bill will really help you out. Sanderling is a really good bird to familiarize yourself with and use that as sort of a reference bird that you can then compare any of the other birds you're looking at to that bird for size, because it's a pretty average sized shorebird and it really can help you figure out who you're looking at. Dunlin is about the same size as a sanderling, a little bigger, but its bill droops off and it's a lot longer. I always say it looks like it held on to something for a little bit too long and its bill kind of stretched out. And then you've got these three sandpipers that we'll talk about in the very last slides here, and they can be really, really confusing. Western sandpipers and semi-palmated sandpipers look really similar, and even people that can tell shorebirds within seconds have trouble sometimes with those. I absolutely have trouble with Western and semi-palmated sandpipers. These sandpipers have a little bit yellow legs, so they actually, you can sort of pick them out if the three of them are together. I just talked about those guys. I sort of left off these ones, and so these are a little bit larger, a little bit more distinct than those sandpipers we just talked about. But once you start to really be able to tell the difference between some of these, they do tend to stand out. Yellow legs with their fine features, they tend to look a little bit more graceful. Dowitchers have these long, very straight bills, and they feed like sewing machines. The red knot here is kind of a medium robin-sized shorebird, very gray in the winter, very indistinct in the winter, but once you kind of get to know that size and the bill shape, it does stand out. And then you've got a willet, which is really common on all the beaches. That's another good one to learn right off the bat. And then the ruddy turnstone, nobody looks like a ruddy turnstone except the ruddy turnstone, so they're a really nice one as well. Those bright orange legs and that kind of speckled calico plumage does stand out even in the winter. Here's going back to that group of sandpipers, just a little glimpse at the the three very confusing Western least and semi-palmated sandpiper, Dunlin in breeding plumage, which is a little bit tricky, and a sanderling standing out there. One of the key things that I always look at with sanderlings is that they have this little bit of a black wedge. I don't know if you can see my cursor on the screen. Can you, Ellie? Okay. I always feel like they look like they've got shoulder patches. This is a really pretty crisp looking young sanderling. That's a juvenile plumage sanderling that's taken in the fall. But even that bird has this little bit of a wedge, dark wedge on its shoulder. And generally they're very light in plumage compared to almost anything else on the beach. So again, that's really, I think, if you're just starting out and you're trying to get a handle on shorebird ID, I think learning the sanderling is a really good first step. And then sort of branching off from there, using process of elimination, paying attention to the bill length and leg length before you get really tied into the plumage, and taking the time to pay attention to behavior. And so if you start off, you learn sanderling, you can tell the difference between a plover and a sandpiper. You're off to a good start, and we're happy to talk more ID tricks and tips later. And I'll turn it over to Allie to talk about seabirds.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Abby. And like I said, we'll record this so you'll be able to watch through that again and we can follow up with you. So please don't notice that I forgot to add a brown pelican picture, but we all know what they look like. But okay, so here are shorebirds we talked about. Now let's talk about seabirds. So just like its name, all of these birds are really good at being on the sea. They've got waterproof feathers. They've got bills that are perfect for diving and fishing or gulping like a pelican or skimming like a black skimmer. They are amazingly aero and hydrodynamic, so they're able to dive down in the water and then fly out of it. Some of them hunt for fish in waves in the sea or in the creeks. But these guys, they typically nest in colonies during nesting season. So out on sandbars and on the tips of barrier islands where right just above the high tide line. They also have webbed feet that make them look really awkward while they're on land. You can go ahead to the next one, Abby. So if you go out to the beaches, you're really lucky to see these guys almost throughout the whole year. So we do get black skimmers that want to nest along our coast in the spring and in summer. And around this time of year, these skimmers have grown big enough to be able to start their travels. Some of them will be banded from different states. So down in the bottom left-hand corner, you'll see one that we saw on Tybee from New Jersey, that's blue. Yellow one from New York. Just the other day, I saw some from North Carolina, from Virginia, and also one from New Jersey the other day. So it's so exciting. This is a page out of our steward handbook, our flip book, and you can go out and you can report these or post them on our Facebook page. We'll talk about that later. These birds from other states, some of them will choose to winter on our coast. Go ahead, Abby. So this is just to let you know that the beach nesting season is coming to an end. So it's March through September. And on this page, you can see an example of a shorebird party over here. These are Wilson's plovers. And then over to the right, we have a least tern. So we have many different species of seabirds that like to nest in these colonies along our beaches. But tonight, we really are going to focus more on these shorebirds. So talking about our shorebirds that nest here, we've got the American oyster catcher, like this beautiful, awesome little scrape of a nest on the left. Their eggs are perfectly camouflaged for being laid upon just right on the beach in the sand, kind of near dunes, sometimes on shell rakes, on sandbars along our coast. And then on the right side, we've got a little Wilson's plover chick. And directly next to it, you'll see a very smaller egg. It's very salt and pepper, blending in really well with the ilmenite, that heavy minerals that occur in our sands. Continue on, Abby. We've got some cuteness to show you. So this is a picture of a Wilson's plover adult incubating its eggs on the right in the rack line. When you get too close, you'll know, because they will start doing a broken wing display. And it is the drama is real. They will try to show you just how weak they are so you can come after them and leave their babies alone. So they almost only do this behavior. They do this behavior almost only when they have eggs to protect or chicks. And then the last video. The last video are these are. Okay, so we did have an oyster catcher nest on the side before, and then this is a little Wilson's plover running off of Abby's palm when she was doing studies with Wilson's plovers on Little St. Simon's Island. And you can see the little bands, the little friendship bands that she had put on its legs to be able to find out what their lives are like and where they're going. And they really like these more vegetated areas along barrier islands, whereas black skimmers whereas American oyster catchers typically lay their eggs just bluntly out in the open. But continuing on to a season more relevant. Happy fall and winter. We've got a lot of beautiful things to see happening now. So we've got a banded piping plover, We've got the trio. We've got a Dunlin, a least, and a Sanderling, all together in a little picture there, quizzing me. And then on the left, we've also got seabirds, like these royal terns, black skimmers, and it looks like some Forester terns mixed in there too. Go ahead, Abby.
Sorry.
That's okay.
I have two screens and I'm trying to steer the ship, and sorry I rushed you through some of those slides, Allie.
It's okay. They were so cute.
I got excited about the videos and just zipped on ahead so y'all could see a little Wilson's plover chick run. Um, but yeah, so as Allie mentioned, now we are in fall and winter, and fall for shorebirds actually starts as early as July. And so I think one of the things, if we're thinking about how we can share the stories of shorebirds, that's really important to understand is that story of migration. And so in Georgia, when we see many of these birds during spring and fall migration, really significant numbers of shorebirds that we see during spring and fall end up being migrating birds, and they may be stopping along our beaches for just a matter of weeks during the spring and fall. Some do stay here the entire winter with us, but others carry on all the way down through South America. And so when we're talking about migration, we're talking about this phenomenon where huge percentages of the population move from one geography to another. And we learn a lot about migration because of tracking studies. We are in what's known as the Atlantic flyway, this pink swath here going from South America all the way up to the Arctic. And so generally speaking, the birds in the Atlantic flyway kind of tend to stay in the flyway. It's just the way that biologists kind of organize birds is by flyway. So you may hear that term, the Atlantic flyway, very often. Um, and for me, as somebody that studies shorebirds, I was always really excited during spring migration, obviously, because these birds are traveling through. You get to see them. It's really fun. It's really exciting. But I always felt like you only get half the story. They're birds that lead like a double life, and they leave our perfect coasts and they go up to the Arctic. So here's a Dunlin up on the Arctic tundra. They land when there's still snow. So you think about it, they leave at the end of May, perfect weather, right? It's beautiful, nice and warm. And they go all the way up to the Arctic where there's still snow on the ground. They have to wait for that snow to melt. They have territorial disputes. They find a mate. They lay their eggs and they raise their chicks all out on the tundra. And they've got a really small window to do it. Our nesting birds here, Allie showed that slide, March to August. That's pretty luxurious. These guys nest from about June and mid-July. And if they're not successful, they usually only have one attempt. But I feel like in order to really understand shorebirds, you have to kind of be able to picture them not only on our beaches here in Georgia, but all the way up on the Arctic tundra. And so I think for me, the Reddy turnstone's a really cool example of that because I'd always see them standing out on the beach, right? Like they stand out. They've got this kind of mottled plumage. They're really pretty. They're pretty showy birds. They don't blend in like some of the others. And you're sort of like, why are you here? And why do you look like that? And very often, it's because they're dressed for a different climate. So a Reddy turnstone, when they're here, they're dressed for when they go up to the Arctic and nest and blend in perfectly on the Arctic tundra. So that's a photo from one of my colleagues, Shiloh, who's done a lot of work in the Arctic. And whoops. And so one of the shorebirds that we often share the story of migration with or through is the red knot. And the red knot is one that is a tremendous athlete, an incredible migrator. And for some of the red knots that we get to see here on our Georgia coast, they actually go the whole length of the hemisphere. Some of these birds are wintering all the way south, the very southern tip of South America in Tierra del Fuego. And every single spring, they fly north all the way up to the Arctic and then back down again, a round trip of nearly 20,000 miles. And when they take these jumps, they'll ready themselves at these very important staging sites and then take off and fly sometimes 4 or 5 days straight without stopping, flapping their wings the whole entire time. It's powered flight. They're not gliding like a vulture. And then landing, resting, refueling, and then doing the same thing again. Very often these migrations take them out over open water. And as we mentioned, shorebirds do not have webbed feet. They cannot swim. So it's really important for them to get the resources that they need to be able to complete those journeys. They really do depend on these safe places to stop. They have reliance on these places. It's called site fidelity. So we know because of studies on these banded birds that they will return to the same places year after year, and they complete just incredible migrations over the course of their lifetime. One of the early red knots that kind of helped us understand this was this one called B95, who over the course of its life was banded in Delaware, resighted in Tierra del Fuego, and nested up in the Arctic. And over about 20 years or so that it was seen, it traveled the distance essentially to the moon and back. So they named that bird the moonbird. Red knots are federally threatened, so they're declining at an alarming rate. And that's because it's so important for them to have these key places where they can find food and resources. And so for us here in the Southeast, we're a really important place for Arctic nesting shorebirds like dowitchers, red knots, semi-palmated sandpipers. They're eating clams, coquina clams on our beaches, but then in the spring, when the water warms and the horseshoe crabs start to spawn, these are little horseshoe crab eggs, and these are horseshoe crab eggs that are farther along in development. You can see the little trilobite horseshoe crabs hatching and spinning around in the eggs here. That's a little clamshell that I'm holding just for scale. But these horseshoe crab eggs are about the size of a mustard seed, and they're just basically like a superfood. So I always say coquina clams are like bird popcorn. They like them a lot, but they're a little harder to digest. Horseshoe crab eggs are really easy to digest, and that helps them put on the weight that they need to fly for 4 or 5 days straight when they leave here around March 25th to get all the way up to the Arctic. And so we're actually learning a ton about shorebirds and shorebird migration even now, because of some really cool technology. So one of our partners, Felicia Sanders in South Carolina with South Carolina DNR, and others out of New Jersey, Larry Niles, and partners, worked on a project where they put some satellite transmitters tags on red knots, and then were able to see where they were going on these journeys. And for a long time, the sort of the story was that these guys all went up to Delaware Bay and left from Delaware Bay to go up to the Arctic. But when we put transmitters on these birds, we realized nearly 2/3 of the red knots that came through the South Carolina, Georgia coast actually were finding enough food to get all the way up to the Arctic. 2/3. That's really significant. That means that without the Georgia, South Carolina coast and the resources that these birds can find here, they wouldn't be able to make it to the Arctic. It's what's known as a terminal staging site. So it's really important. And this study just was shocking to a lot of people in the red knot horseshoe crab world, and just further exemplified why our area is so important. So we love to share the story of red knots with folks when we're out on the beaches. You don't have to know all the details. You don't have to know where they go or how they get there. But sharing the story of a shorebird that's about the size of a robin. Here, this slide shows you a nice breeding plumage red knot, and then one that you're going to see in the fall and winter. Um, these guys are incredible long distance migrants. During the fall and the winter, we have a not insignificant number of red knots that will be on our beaches in this gray plumage. And so we know that there's the long distance birds that go all the way down to Tierra del Fuego. There's also a group that winters here in the southeast. And that's really important for them to have the food and resources as well, because they are ultimately going to go up to the Arctic too. Another bird that we often see that's an incredible migrating shorebird is the whimbrel. And they are here during the spring. We see a lot more of them, but during the winter and fall, we see some as well. This long decurved bill, perfect for eating fiddler crabs, pulling them right out of the burrows. And again, they are up in the Arctic nesting. So Allie's got a QR code here. This is another neat story about a really important site in South Carolina, DeVoe Bank, where we've got huge numbers of whimbrels. Felicia Sanders and the incredible team at South Carolina DNR kind of led the charge with some of this work, along with a graduate student, Mina Handmaker, who's now at University of Massachusetts at Amherst, doing some really cool research with this. So I think this guy, this whimbrel here, is just another example of how incredible migration is and how lucky we are to get to observe some of these things on our coastline, really throughout the seasons. And I'll turn it over to Allie to talk a little bit more about our wintering birds.
Awesome. Thanks, Abby. So going out on the beaches in the winter, this is kind of what what you're going to be seeing when you're walking down them. But through the scope, if you look really nice and hard with your eyes, you can see these non-breeding birds blending in so perfectly with our sand and our habitats here. So one I'd like to talk to you about is we talked about a little bit with the shoulder pads are sanderlings. And when I'm talking to people, I like to give these birds a little bit of a active names so that people can start to recognize them with their naked eye and make their own memories with them. So these birds are master wave chasers. They're a sandpiper and they have smaller eyes but nice and long beaks. Their beaks probe into the sand and they run up and down the beach, following the waves as they come in and as they come back out. And what they're eating are these little coquina surf clams that like to dig out of the sand when the wave is coming, catch the ride of their lives up the beach, and then dig back into the sand before a bird eats them. But luckily for these sanderling, they are they have a very high success rate. They can get a lot of coquina surf clams. It's our most common and widespread sandpiper on the Georgia and South Carolina coast. So when I tell people if it's a little white puffball going down the beach chasing the waves, it's most likely our sanderlings. The next bird I'd like to talk about are our ruddy turnstones. So here's a great image of a ruddy turnstone in breeding plumage and then in non-breeding plumage. So it's one of my favorite times to see ruddy turnstones are in the non-breeding because that bird blends in so well with the woody debris that washes up with the storms and with the tide lines. It's called the rack line. And so imagine this little non-breeding ruddy turnstone sitting in the rack line, blending in perfectly. But as soon as it stands up, those orange pantyhose are so noticeable. They're also rascals. They love to turn stones over. They'll eat the insides out of a horseshoe crab that's flipped over. They'll be diving down in a bunch of seaweed and weird things that wash up on the beach. They're rascals. But these little guys also go up to the Arctic. So very bold. And I refer to this bird as a little rascal, a bird to flip out over. Go ahead. Okay. So the piping plovers are coming here. So there's three breeding populations. So what that means is there's three designated or three areas that are designated areas where these birds are nesting, and they're different populations. So we've got one a little bit out west, we've got one along the Great Lakes, and then we've got one up in the Northeast. And so they have different banding schemes from different breeding populations. And we're lucky enough to get all three members from all three groups spending the entire winter with us. So right now we do currently have piping plover on our beaches. And we also saw a brand new flag recently, and it's a blue flagged CM5. And that is where I will drop the mic and leave you in suspense. Stay tuned for the story. We have reported it and we'll let you know. But these are there's a federally endangered breeding populations. The Great Lakes Piping Plover Project has done a really great job with all of their banding and storytelling and reporting and data collection. So all of the data that we're collecting on these birds, it really has a big impact for the people that see them when they're nesting and when they first hatch. So they are a high priority state species for Georgia, and they're very important in South Carolina too. They like to roost up in the dry sand, and they blend in really well with tire tracks on the beach. So when you're doing a walk, taking extra care to look at even in the tiniest little indentions along the beach, you might see these guys. And just remember, these piping plovers have nice big buggy eyes and nice short bills. So they'll visually stand up, kind of looking like they're high on their horse looking on the beach, using their big beady eyes around to look for marine worms or movement on the sand. And then they'll run to their target, use that strong, short, tight bill and pull the marine worm all the way out and eat it. So they're really fun to watch during the winter, and they'll be here for quite a while into the spring. I'll pass it back to Abby.
All right. So as Allie said, piping plovers are federally endangered. And generally speaking, when we're thinking about shorebirds, piping plovers are just one of the many species that are in trouble. You may remember it's 5 years ago now, which is crazy to think about, but that paper that talked about 3 billion birds, we have 3 billion birds fewer than we did in the 1970s. Cornell and others put that paper out. And one of the groups that's most hard hit is actually shorebirds. And so we've got a lot of trend information that's actually come from international shorebird surveys that have been conducted since around the 1970s as well. And analyzing that data shows us that many of these birds are in decline. You see this figure all the way to the left here. Red knot is at the very bottom of the list here, having a pretty horrifying decline in population. Many of our long distance migrating shorebirds are down towards the left here, but everybody that's in this red box more or less is declining. And some new research from colleagues at Manomet and other partners has looked at even the rate of those declines, and we're seeing that for some of these species, the rate of decline is actually increasing. So we know that things are very difficult for shorebirds, and there's some reasons that shorebird conservation is so challenging. One is that we're talking about birds that are covering a huge geography, so it takes a lot of partnership to protect the places that shorebirds need and to address these threats. We also talked a little bit about site fidelity, right? If you lose one important place to these shorebirds, or if something changes, or if you have sea level rise, or a giant environmental catastrophe or development, that's going to have implications that will affect the entire population of these birds. So some pretty significant challenges, but I think that it also creates some opportunities as well. It means that our actions locally really can have a pretty important impact. Um, so some of the big threats that we talk a lot about, I just mentioned them sort of offhand here, but habitat loss is a big one. With sea level rise, the number of extreme tides per year. This is coming from the tidal gauge at Fort Pulaski in Georgia, showing you just how many sort of extreme tidal events we're having. And that only went to 2020. The trend is just continuing up and up. And so we're seeing a lot of beach erosion. We're seeing a lot of changes in habitats. This is affecting our nesting birds for sure, but also some of the birds that need these really important places for foraging during migration or high and dry places to roost at. The other big threat that we grapple with a lot in the southeast is disturbance, right? This area is important for shorebirds throughout the entire year, but it's also really nice for people throughout the entire year. And so we know that recreational disturbance basically renders what could be really good habitat functionally unavailable. If there's too many people, or if there's dogs, or there's boats, birds are not going to be able to use those places, and that can have impacts to their overall health. It can have sublethal impacts. It can impact their productivity. So a lot of different ways that we see disturbance having negative effects on our shorebird populations. But where people and birds overlap, there are opportunities for education and outreach, and that is where this stewarding program and acting as an ambassador really comes into play. So we have a lot of different tools in the toolbox, using rope lines, symbolic fencing, putting up signage, educating people through different events, getting volunteers to act as stewards. There's been some really great research that looks at stewardship really does have a big impact. You can have signs up, you can have ropes up, but having people communicate with the public is really one of the best ways to make an impact for our nesting birds and for our migratory and wintering birds as well. So we work with a lot of partners, and we're really excited about building out these programs and providing some of the resources that we've developed over the years as we've worked particularly on Tybee and St. Simons Island to help engage folks who might be interested in getting people out on the beaches. One of the things that we've done in collaboration with Georgia DNR, with support from National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, and in partnership with the Dare Human Dimensions Lab at Virginia Tech, is identify certain key areas on Tybee and St. Simons as wildlife beach areas, and then really focusing our stewarding activities around those places so that we can help people understand that those areas particularly are really sensitive habitats, and they are really critical for our birds. And this is part of a larger project. This that that's actually spread now well beyond just the few sites that were in the very beginning. We had sort of a handful of pilot sites, and now it's expanded all across the whole Atlantic coast, all the way up into Canada and down south as well. The idea here is to highlight these key areas and then use social science to work within these communities to address some of the big behaviors that we would like to change. So we work with our steward volunteers to help people on Tybee understand that this kind of north part of the beach, where the birds are anyways, where the skimmers try to nest, where the piping plovers roost, are important for. Did I talk over your stuff, Allie? Is this your? No.
Keep rocking, you're great.
Okay. Anyways, it's important for skimmers, for piping plovers, and we're using social science techniques to really try to get people to stay below the tide line and walk around birds when they see them on Tybee. And then on St. Simons, we've identified a similar area, a wildlife beach area, an area where Wilson's plovers and least terns try to nest, and there's a pond back here that's really good foraging and roosting habitat as well. And here we're really trying to ask people to leash their dogs and walk around flocks of birds. And so using our tools in our toolbox to help spread that message as well. And now I will turn it over to you, Allie.
Thank you. So, Abby and I have a Georgia Coastal Bird Ambassador program. It's our steward group. We wanted to include seabirds and shorebirds, so the name just kept getting a little longer to make sure we were being fair to them all. But this group's been really great. We've been, Abby and our friend Lydia Thompson started this project a long time ago, and I'm lucky enough to come in a little bit later, learn a lot from them, and try to keep things going and build and expand. But what we try to do is get people out to the beach with the same kind of like enthusiasm that we think is really helpful with social science and with conservation, to let people know what they're seeing and respect wildlife from a distance, and also be able to collect some data or spread the messages onward. Go ahead, Abby. So this is what we have in our box, in our steward box, in our ambassador box. We have one at each location. So inside this box, there'll be a flip book, which you can see the picture right there to the right. It's a laminated, nice full-size book that you can bring out in the field with you, with a lot of really interesting infographics and pages with cool stories and shorebird and seabird knowledge to share with the public, so that you don't have to remember everything to feel like you can go out and share. We've also got field guides. We slip in some SPF. We have binoculars and scopes available by request at different places. And then we also have a field notebook and some vests. This is constantly a changing and evolving gearbox, so stay tuned for some upgrades in the next couple of weeks. So one of the things in the box is this this waterproof one-pager field guide. So this is front and back. This field guide is great for just slipping in a beach bag or a boat bag and passing out to people, so that they can see all of these amazing birds in both of their plumages, without getting too close, and being able to walk around, identify and walk around the flocks. So this is a really helpful tool. We give them out at tabling events. It shows what parts of the year these birds are depending on our beaches. And it does have gull species, tern species, our black skimmer, and then our shorebird species. So all of these birds are really important, but these are the most common birds that these people will interact with or see when they go out on the coast. So some main messages we ask our stewards to share are, these habitats are important year round. So designating them as wildlife beach areas is great for not just birds, but for all wildlife, for vegetation, for sea turtles in the summer, for a lot of different animals. And so giving these birds space and allowing these birds to feed in the wet sand and roost in the dry sand above the tide line. So we ask people to walk around flocks, stay on the wet sand, and in some places where there are dogs allowed, we we want people to maybe choose to leash their dogs in these areas that are wildlife beach areas that are extra important for birds, so that it will reduce the chance of disturbing them while they're trying to get enough food to make it to their next journey. So this is what a shift looks like if you are interested in becoming a volunteer. So if you need any gear, you can ask me for the details on where the steward box is at your location, and you can go and take whatever gear you would like to go with you. Head out to our wildlife beach areas. So on Tybee, that's North Beach, but the South Beach is also very important, and we've included that into our program. And then down in St. Simons, we do have East Beach, and we also have Gould's Inlet. Those are great places to go out and talk to people. So you'll walk around, or you can decide to bring a chair and an umbrella and sit up with your gear and kind of post up with a table. You observe birds, people, conditions, what the weather feels like, if there's a storm coming in, if there's anything interesting, like I noticed a bunch of jellyfish washing up this time of year. All of that is really important for us to know. And share these main messages with beachgoers. You don't have to go out and know how to identify a semi-palmated sandpiper from a western. That still gives me some anxiety. But being able to go out and allow people to use our optics, like our scope that we can provide for you, or binoculars, or this flip book, it just allows them to better appreciate nature. So, being these ambassadors is really huge for these birds that can't do that for themselves. So then you'll return the material, and you'll go on your phone or your computer, and you will submit a post-shift report. I also have a Facebook group page for volunteers. I find that it's just kind of easy of a platform, but I'll go into more of that later. Post-shift reports are important. So on this post-shift report, it allows us to track our impacts. So Abby and I, we work for a nonprofit, and we partner with a lot of people, and we pull together all of these resources in our time. So your time helps us fund this program. Your observations help us show our impact. And then your data is helping drive these decisions in areas. So say we see large numbers of certain types of shorebirds in an area, and then there are some changes made in the community that want to kind of change or alter that space. Your data allows us to be able to have a voice for the species that aren't in the room with the humans. So we just really appreciate y'all who are filling them out. Feel free to scan this. This is a working QR code. This is one I made for the fall and winter. And then we have a different one for this spring. So the questions will be a little bit more pertinent to the season. Next slide. I won't go through the whole shift report because I know we're getting kind of a little bit on time. But you enter in, this is what it looks like when you scan it. You enter in your email, the date of the shift, you select your site, and then the names of any volunteers, because we do track our volunteers' hours, and they, the time that you are traveling to go steward and back is still part of your volunteering time. So your shift start time and end time indicate the hours that for the shift, the number of people reached. Continue, Abby. And then the number of target species. So a lot of our target species are here during nesting season, especially like the Wilson's plover or American oyster catchers. But in the fall and in the spring, we do get these red knots and these sanderlings, and we do notice our black skimmers, which is the seabird, throughout the year. And so just being able to put a couple of numbers of, I saw like 6 black skimmers, or say you didn't know if you saw sanderlings or not, you could enter in that you saw 22 sandpipers, and then tell me a little bit more about them if you're interested in adding in some details. But this is just like kind of a baseline for you to go out and get involved, get started with these surveys. And as you do these enough, you get into a different kind of groove and knowledge with more that you learn throughout the time. And what I'll do is I'll go out with you and do bird walks and help you work on the things in question. We also like you to report like how many people you talk to, and if there's any like cool stories or things that worked, or something very interesting about what you learned from people. That's really huge for us too. The next slide is awesome. So some of the steward materials that you'll have is this flip book. You can continue, Abby. And so I just wanted to show you a couple pages out of it. Sometimes people don't understand like the perspective of how hard it is for these birds that are nesting on our beaches to make it through a whole season. They survive heat, they survive sun, predators from above, predators from below, people walking, dogs. They need to eat enough food, but they're also being run off by people that like these birds have a really they have a lot going against them. So I think sometimes it's really important to show people the pictures of just how small and you know, perfect these little birds are that are hiding in the rack, like these Wilson's plovers, or showing behaviors that they might not see unless they are disturbing birds. So up in the upper right hand corner, we've got a least turn. And if you've ever wondered what like anger looks like in a photo, that's it. That is like a mad least turn. And when a least turn's doing that kind of behavior, calling, dive bombing, or giving you that look, you know you're too close, and you can assume that they are trying to nest and you're nearby. But a lot of these things don't happen unless people are disturbing birds. So it is really important to teach these people that you're interacting with what to look out for. You can continue, Abby. I'll let you actually keep on continuing. There are some good stories as with birds with bands, and that piping plover one was about a bird that comes back to the same place year after year. But go to the next slide, Abby. We'll talk about these banded birds. You know, we do have this page in the book as well. And what's great is you can use this book to find out who you're looking at and where they're from. And so visitors love to see stuff like this. And so some people will be visiting from, you know, up in New Jersey they're visiting down from New Jersey. So they always giggle, oh, these birds are following me coast to coast. So it's a great way to connect sites and connect people. And so you can use this to read bands, and you can also use them to give us a call or post on our Facebook about what color bands you see. You can continue. And then explaining the why. So like I said, here's a couple more pictures out of our flip book. This shows people why we need to be giving these birds space. A lot of people don't get to grasp that without getting to see some great examples. So bottom right hand corner, that's an American oyster catcher chick hiding underneath this woody rack that washed up on the beach. And look how easy it is to not see that bird. I mean, it's blending in so well. Or above it, we've got a Wilson's plover chick in somebody's footprint. So this is a really great page for explaining to people, you know, watch where you're stepping when you're up in the dry sand. Watch where you're stepping along the rack line. So we provide you these materials so that you have some backing behind you being out there and witnessing things out on the beaches. And then this is a really powerful page. I love dogs. Abby has the cutest dog in the whole world. Don't tell other dogs I said that. But when these birds are flying these really long distances and they stop along the way, we have no idea the kind of predators they see. So who's to tell them that your beautiful, sweet dog doesn't look just like the coyote or the wolf or the scary minx or whatever happens to be a really crazy predator that I don't know about in other countries along this flyway all the way down to South America, or up in the Arctic where they can see, you know, these wolves and things coming from far away. So when they do see your dog, it does affect them. They don't know that your pet is a pet and not a threat. This is a really good page just to show the comparison of a dog, a fox, and a coyote, and put it kind of in some shorebird perspective for them. Continue. Okay, so kind of wrapping up here, we do have some resources for those of you who would like to be stewards or want to get involved in our ambassador program or are part of one and want to hop in and see what it's like on our beaches too. We invite you to join. We've got a Facebook group called the Georgia Coastal Bird Ambassadors. I will make sure to send a follow-up email with a link to join. But we also have a webpage called georgiashorebird.com where we keep a lot of our steward resources and training videos and flipbook information all in one place. And this website is great because it's backed by all of the people who care about shorebirds from different entities. So we've got Georgia DNR that helps us with this, different Audubon groups, 100 Miles, us, Manomet, we all are underneath this beautiful Georgia Shorebird Alliance umbrella together. So that's a great website to check out. Our Facebook page is a great place where you can see all of the recordings, have access to all of our links, see updated pictures of what I'm seeing on surveys. I love when people post things for help identifying things. I think it's great. I won't respond right away because I like to give everybody else a chance, but it's a great way to meet other volunteers and also hear about our upcoming events. Go ahead, Abby. Quick mention for the georgiashorebird.com is when you do hop on this page, it is our stewarding resources is up at the top. And it'll ask you to sign up to be able to access them. And this actually really was a thing for us because it helps protect the materials we work so hard on. We do share these resources and materials very, very religiously with all of our partners and friends, but we do have a formal process of doing so. And this just helps us be able to collect all of our impact that we are generating by sharing these things. So you can go to georgiashorebird.com. You can sign up. It'll ask you to sign up with your with your email or your Facebook or Google. And what we do ask is that you put your first and last name in there so we know who we're talking to or interacting with for any future questions or things like that. Continue, Abby. And last thing is we've got some upcoming events. And I'll make sure to email this out as well. September is rapidly coming to a close, and this weekend's a little bit iffy with this weather coming up. So the North Beach, the Tybee Island Beach Walk tomorrow is definitely going to be canceled, and I'll make sure to post it all over our Facebook and stuff. I'm wishing you guys the safest time with all the weather. But this Sunday, if the world allows, Abby and I will be talking at the Tybee Historic Post Theater on Tybee Island. It's a really pretty lecture hall, a really pretty theater. It's got great seating, concessions, and drinks, and it's pay what you want. And the donations go to the theater for letting us do our talk there. It'll be great. About 4 to 6, and we'll be hanging out after the show for a little bit to talk to any potential volunteers and people interested. So if you know someone that might be in our area, send them our way. And then just go ahead and look around on these other events. We've got bird walks in St. Simon's. We've got bird walks on Tybee. And then our next big event is Coast Fest in Brunswick, Georgia. And come for everybody because there's going to be tables of all of these amazing organizations, and we're lucky enough to be involved. So you can swing by. Everybody's got cool activities, things to pass out. It's like a field day for people who love science and the coast and conservation. So come join us to celebrate. We'll be there. And if anyone would like to volunteer with that or come with us, my answer is yes. Go ahead, Abby, to the next slide. I want to do a huge shout out to some very special people in my life. Our volunteers. I love you so much. You do so much amazing work for us, helping us table, helping us post signs, going out and talking to people, recording things, being the person who calls me and lets me know what's up. We just appreciate you more than words could ever say. And so I don't want to tear up on camera, so I'm just going to gloss over this, but we love you and we just appreciate you so much. And if you think this could be you, know that we want you to. And so, lastly, I'd like to wrap it up and say thank you for joining us. Um, you know how to get in contact with me or with Abby. Our emails are here. Our Facebook page is a very active Facebook page. We have upcoming events, we have opportunities to volunteer. We love talking to different groups. If you have a group in mind, we would love to find ways to come out and explain our work and find support for our programs. We would love to partner with your favorite organizations. We're ready for more opportunities, and we actively seek them out. And so you just let us know if you've got some good ideas yourself. And this last QR code will take you to a post training survey. It's a new thing that Abby and I are doing because it's completely anonymous, and I'm putting the link in the chat as well. What it does is it kind of helps us figure out what we should be including, because we talk about this material all the time, a lot. We talk about it every day of our lives. So it's nice to hear some feedback from you all about what's important to you, what you would really like to know. Things we could work on would be really helpful. And I just want to reiterate, it is 100% through Zoom, anonymous. I was really happy to find out it had that function. And so just give us your honest opinion. And if you want to volunteer, just email me or join that Facebook group. And I'm going to turn it to Abby to say anything else you'd like to say too.
Well, I will say first off, thank you all for joining on an evening. And we're really excited. There's some new faces here, so I'm always really excited to get to see. Of course, I'm super excited to get to see the people I know and love, but also real excited to see new people that might want to get involved. And so, if you do want to get involved, I'll give you another minute to either take a photo of that QR code or copy down the link, and then I'll stop sharing my screen. Um, if you do want to get involved, please reach out, Allie or me. If you have any other questions and you want more information, please reach out. And as Allie said, we love talking to groups too. So if there's a group of people that you work with that you want to have the opportunity for them to learn more, we'd love to share information and materials with anybody. And I'll stop sharing for now, but we said we'd go till about 7:30 or so, and we actually ended our talking a little early, Allie. I don't know how that happened, but we'd love to open it up for discussion or questions. So if anybody wants to share anything or have any questions, please feel free. Let's talk for a little while. And
I'm
also, if you want to go because it's dinner time and you've got a life, please feel free to hop off. And it was great to so.
I'm gonna pause the recording so you guys can feel free to ask or say anything you'd like.